Hi, class. We are on week 6. It's going by very quickly. We only have a couple more weeks left and then we are done. I did enjoy reading your HIV/AIDS papers and just finding some of the research that you guys found. And I enjoyed just seeing some of your responses as far as, things that have been done well, things that haven't been done well. Um, I think when the AIDS epidemic began in like the 80s, there's a really actually a great HBO documentary about this. You might watch it in your AIDS HIV class, but people just really didn't know how to react or to respond. And so when people tend to not know things or be educated on factual information, they tend to react and respond out of fear, which usually is never a good response. And so I think a lot of things during that time weren't handled well, even probably the church's response to people who were diagnosed with AIDS and or HIV. There was a lot of terrible, ignorant comments made. It's just a gay person's disease, all those kinds of things, which aren't true or factual. There's many ways for HIV to be transmitted. There's many, many ways that people even got AIDS back then that they just didn't know. Blood transfusions, obviously, IV drug use, like needle use. There is a sexual it can be sexually transmitted, but it's not just from homosexual intercourse, it's also through heterosexual intercourse. It can be transmitted through birth, blood intermixing, so a lot of different ways, right? And it wasn't limited to just one way. And as a result, people were very offensive and ignorant and rude and wrong. And so how we learn and grow as people is knowledge is power, information is power. So the more we understand, the better we can protect and or know how to react to others and not to be unkind or unloving. And really, the church should be one of the places where people feel safe to go to and get, support and help and prayer and all the things. So I reading some of your faith integrations with the paper was really good to see what some of you were saying. I think there's been a lot of redemption in this area as far as because people better understand, and it's something for us to take into consideration even in our line of work. The more we understand, the better we can educate even our clients on certain topics, areas that they might be facing, and then hopefully reduce even fear for them. So it was good to read your papers. This week we're talking about just sexuality, some things about homosexuality, how we're approaching this as a church. And I think for most people, there's a longing for sexual relationship in some degree. Maybe not everybody knows what that is. I just was listening to something just recently, and they were talking about hooking up and how people who hook up usually are looking for a deeper connection with somebody, and you can't get that in a short time of just knowing someone, whether it's one night or not very long. It's hard to have intimacy. And so, there's a lot of complexity in what I think people actually want and what they actually get in certain sexual encounters. I think we as people crave connection, we crave community, we crave to be close and be in relationship with someone. And sex is the closest way you can be to another person physically, right? It's the closest that a man can physically be to a woman. And it's the closest a woman physically could be with a man, vice versa. So when we look at it from a church perspective, right, many churches are looking at how to respond to homosexuality and transgender people. And the main thing is, from our perspective, right, as therapists, whether you market yourself as a Christian therapist or you're just marketing yourself as a therapist, what we personally believe or value as people cannot come into the counseling room because that would be considered unethical. So, regardless of your own personal stance or how you choose to live your life or how you choose to raise your family or your kids cannot come into play when you're working as a licensed marriage and family therapist or licensed professional counselor licensed by the state and or governing boards. So just keep that in mind. Now, the church can be a place where it can be loving and welcoming and maybe not agree with the decision, but also love people and support people, and or it can be a very negative place where they don't accept and or love people and leave people with a really bad taste in their mouth. And so, there's many biblical references in regards to sexuality. And, there's different ethical positions held within the Christian community about this. And so we have to hopefully get back to a place of, as a church, like, regardless of how a person is sinning is, it's God's job to judge. It's the Holy Spirit's job to convict, and it's our job to love. The judging and the convicting need to be done by the people who ultimately have the authority. And so with that being said, you may not agree with a homosexual lifestyle and or a person who is living that lifestyle in your church, but there's, believe me, a lot of sin that's happening in your church. And so it's trying to navigate, how do we love someone, how do we join them in community, come alongside someone even if we don't agree with a choice or decision that they're making. How do we do that in a heterosexual relationship with maybe someone who's cohabitating? How do we do that with someone who's deciding to be sexually active and is continuing to do that despite knowing they're wrong? How do we come alongside people who are doing something that we don't agree with and support them and love them and, talk to them about their choices and decisions, but not condemn them? I think that's what we need to focus on as a church. Now, as a clinician, you might be saying, I have no experience in this. I don't know any people who are maybe gay or transgender. I don't know what to do. I feel very uncomfortable. Well, you won't know what to do until you have an experience. So, I think it's being open to, like, you may get a couple who is homosexual. You may get a person who is transgender or considering a transition. You are not giving permission and or saying, I agree with what you're doing just because they come to your office. You are there listening to them and offering them a chance to vent, to talk, to be heard, to maybe for them to feel understood. Being understood is not always agreeing with someone. And so it's important that we understand, by you sitting with someone in an office does not say that you're necessarily giving them permission to do whatever they're doing. You're just the person that is there to hear them, to listen to them, to give them, tools potentially as whatever they're facing. Going through potentially transitioning can be a very hard thing for a person. There are many studies that show that people who end up transitioning still feel the same amount of mental health strain as they did before the transition. Regardless of your personal opinions about transitioning, nobody should ever want to hurt themselves or harm themselves as a result of how they feel. And so we need to come alongside people and figure out a way for them to figure out how to better cope with whatever it is that they're feeling, regardless of the situation and your own personal opinions about it. That's the beauty of therapy. It's not about the therapist, right? It's about the client. Too many people have relationships that are about other people and not about the person. And so as for us, we need to come alongside and figure out how to support and or help give them resources, whether that's telling them about support groups or knowing what's in the community that's available, right? The reality is, Jesus hung, when he walked on this earth, he hung out with sinners. He didn't hang out with all the people who were super religious and said all the really pretty prayers and wore all the special clothing. He hung out with the people who were making choices and decisions, and he came alongside them and he talked to them, and he talked to them in a way where there, yes, there was truth, but there was also love. And trying to walk that line, I know, is fine, but that's the line in a sense that the church needs to find, and or us trying to be clinicians, we need to figure out where we need to put ourselves aside and where we need to be present for our clients, because that's really important. There's going to be a few articles for you to read in this week for you to get further depth on this subject matter. Now, we're talking about transitioning a lot more in our culture. There's been a lot of talk about it happening at a young age. I personally would not do any sort of signing of documents or things like that as a clinician. For me personally, I don't feel comfortable, just because I've seen now a few different situations where people have started transitioning too early and then they change their minds. And I just don't know enough about the physical long-term effects of starting hormonal therapy and then getting off of hormonal therapy. I just don't feel comfortable with that. And not everyone is going to be in a situation where they would do that. Some people feel very comfortable doing that. That's going to be a personal kind of choice once you get into probably a licensed state, what you get to decide you want to do. But, our reading is not to say that's going to necessarily change your own personal opinions on homosexuality or transgender, dealing with people who are going through those things. But it's always important. I want to point you back to, with anything that you're going to deal with, like we're held to the standard of the state of California, and we're mandated reporters. So that's always harm to self, others, elder abuse, or child abuse we report. Otherwise, everything stays in the confines of that room. We cannot discriminate based on our own personal differences. And I know that may be hard. But we want to make sure that we are being mindful of that when we're dealing with people. So I hope this is helpful, gives you a little bit of insight. I think you'll enjoy the articles. There's also a video that's posted in the week. We're almost done. We will do one more live lecture, and then week 8 we won't, just because of everything that needs to be completed with the capstone. I wish you all well, and have a great week.